Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be exploring dungeons, looking for magical items in D&D Honor Amongst Thieves, and then trying to license a video game from the Soviet Union in Tetris. But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Well, just in case anyone was worried that there's no superheroes in that list of items, I've been watching the second season of Superman and Lois, the DC Comics adaptation currently airing on, I think on the CW in the States, and it's actually all up on BBC iPlayer here, so yeah, if you have a TV license and or other forms of access to iPlayer, you can now go on and watch the first two seasons of Superman and Lois. And this is, a new version of Superman in which he's a middle-aged dad, he's got two twin sons, and he and Lois have moved from Metropolis to his tiny hometown of Smallville to raise the young lads. And of course it turns out there's supervillains here as well. One of the twins might be developing superpowers, which of course leads to some competitive jealousy issues with the other twin. There's love interests, there's villains, there's Lois Lane's family coming back to haunt her. There's all sorts of drama. And yes, I've seen 2 seasons of this. It's sort of a spin-off from the old Flowerverse Supergirl show, but not really. In that they've established it's a separate universe in the multiverse and has nothing to do with that show. The guy playing Superman did play Superman in a handful of episodes of Supergirl. Happily, it's easy to not think about it.
And it's not connected to the Clark and Lois show from the 90s, early noughts?
Well, possibly it sort of could be if you wanted it to be, because, that was about, 20 years ago? That's probably slightly too much time. But yeah, you could sort of imagine that this is that Superman, grown up, married Lois and had 2 kids. It's not out of the question. If you actually dig into the continuity, it may well be. Like, I gather they're introducing a version of Lex Luthor in the upcoming 3rd season. And I imagine he probably won't be necessarily the one from that show. But yeah, I think it's being left such that it can be whatever your Superman is, grown up a bit.
All right, interesting. Are they adapting a specific comic or run of the comics for this? Or are they just sort of picking and choosing from Superman lore?
Kind of pick and choosing to an extent. I mean, there was an era in the comics shortly after the Rebirth story, which I think we read, actually. The DC Rebirth one-shot ages ago.
Yes, we did, yeah.
The period shortly after that where Clark and Lois had a young son, and that was their continuity, and there was a lot of people who liked that. That's sort of being brought in. One of the 2 twin sons has the same name as that son from the comics. So yeah, there's bits and bobs being hinted at, but no, this is kind of its own thing. It's not a direct adaptation of any specific comic. But it's a lot of fun. It's quite, it's the CW. The budget is about the same as, the average Flash Arrow episode. There's only so much high-powered Superman action you can do. So a lot of this, to be honest, is kind of about the emotion of it. It's a very sort of emotionally raw show. It's mostly about, Superman as a good dad trying to do his best to be, the best possible guy and the best possible dad and the best possible Superman, and having to occasionally choose between being, a slightly worse dad in order to be a better Superman, or vice versa, and his angst over it, and him and Lois having emotionally honest conversations about how he can deal with it. It's not the most, complex or challenging shows in the world, but it's very nice. It's a very good, pure Superman as dad show.
So he's a small-town dad with a demanding job.
Yeah, he's a small-town dad with a demanding job, and that demanding job just happens to be wearing a cape and punching supervillains.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of very high-concept Superman in the cinema. One of the things that I think a lot of recent adaptations have missed out is a focus on blockbuster spectacle and not enough character, and the sort of things that people really relate to. So I guess putting like the character drama front and center seems like a good idea.
Yeah, I don't know. I think sometimes a lot of recent Superman adaptations have kind of not wanted to put the focus on Superman being a nice guy because that's seen as boring or something. And if that sounds like a direct jab at the Snyderverse, then yes, you've interpreted that correctly.
Yeah, there's a lot of Superman is a god amongst mortals.
If you have been yearning for Superman as just quite a nice man, a really good dude, tried his best to be the goodest dude he can, then yeah, this is that. And the show is called Superman and Lois, and although, if we're being honest, Superman does get a bit more screen time, Elizabeth Tulloch, who plays Lois, is also very good and does get quite a lot of stuff to do as the person who's forced to actually, man the home front in the family while Superman's off being super.
Yeah, I guess that's part of the sort of character family drama of it.
Yeah, I mean, she has also got a job at the local newspaper, she's not gone full housewife here, but yeah, there's a lot of sort of action between Superman and Lois about, equal parenting and stuff. It's good, solid material. I wasn't entirely sure I'd like it, but yeah, no, I really do. They also put a sort of, it's hard to describe, a sort of slightly less cheap-looking filter on this. They've managed to somehow afford a sort of luxurious premium looking filter for this show, even though you can sense it's still sort of a fairly low budget show that uses a lot of the same sets and a lot of the same actors in different combinations and tries to minimise its action scenes. But it's shot through quite a a nice filter, and there's lots of like distant shots of people looking moody. So it comes across as a slightly more premium product than some of the Flowerverse shows did.
I was going to ask, is there a tonal consistency with the Flowerverse? I assume this is like the plot is sort of standalone. You can just kind of start watching this without following the wider plot of the Flower universe.
No, there's not really any consistency. You get the feeling they may have correctly read the tea leaves, but when they started making this, the wider Flowerverse was kind of on the way out as a thing. And indeed it is. Apart from about 4 remaining episodes of Flash, I think the whole enterprise is pretty much dead at this point. So they have probably somewhat wisely made this basically its own thing. And totally, there's the occasion. It's a bit more serious, to be honest. It's a bit more ponderous and concerned with feelings than the Flowerverse, which sometimes was a bit more focused on the old action and quips.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I don't know if that's really a tone that suits Superman any more than I suppose the sort of dark and moody tone that suits the Snyderverse. Superman's not really a sort of quips kind of guy.
Well, yeah, plus the main characters in this are being written as sort of late 30s, early 40s parents. They're not, like, attractive teens in early 20-somethings, like almost everyone in the sort of Flowerverse shows were. There was, I think a vague attempt to make those in what I believe is known as the traditional CW bracket of look how hot our actors are. And although, you know, this is an American TV show and obviously everyone is a certain level of attractive, it is, I think, filmed as more of a sort of maybe slightly soapy show about people in their midlife having emotions rather than hot people being hot.
And, sarcastically funny.
I mean, there's jokes, it's a modern superhero show, of course there's jokes. They're not as front and centre.
Oh, interesting, yeah. My partner really liked the first season of this. I think she's going to dive into the second season at some point. So, yeah, it has been well received.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed this. I think they're still currently waiting to see if they get a 4th season. The 3rd one is underway in America. Obviously, amid the various turmoils at both DC and the wider Warner Brothers corporate universe, who can say if there'll be a 4th season? But, yeah, for the record, I hope this gets, at least a sort of healthy 5-6 years TV life. It's a decent show. Tyler Hoechlin, who plays Superman, is, I think, one of the best Supermen I've seen in a while.
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult one to inherit. We've got everyone from Christopher Reeve to Henry Cavill sort of don the Superman tights at various points in the last few decades.
Well, yeah, the level of inspirational wonderfulness you're meant to embody is, I don't know. It sounds like quite a job, especially when you're meant to combine it with your sort of fallible dad emotions in this show. But yeah, no, he does it. This is very good. If you're up for some sort of warm emotional comfort viewing, then yeah, good series. Anyway, so yes, I've been, bathing in some super dad action. Alistair, what have you been doing?
Well, it's another show that does put family relationships at its core. I've been watching a classic show that's on Netflix, so I've gone back to the 90s to watch Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is a 90s anime story about a group of teenagers who go into giant robots to fight these invading creatures from another dimension called angels. Yeah, it's one of the, I guess, classics of the mecha anime genre. It's got this sort of like epic story told across 26 episodes. Yeah, just one season run, 26 episodes, which is, it's all up on Netflix. And although it is a show about giant robots fighting invading angels, it is beneath that there's this kind of real rich level of psychology and character relationships. I can see why this has become a classic, why it's something that still gets talked about, and you see people with Evangelion tote bags, and it's still like kind of cultural reference. I think partly because it does really dig into the psychology of what it means to take on the mantle of having to save the world and fight people, and the fact that these are just teenagers and they're going through normal teenage stuff whilst also this enormous amount of pressure is kind of heaped on them. And it does go to some quite metaphysical, there's loads of religious and sort of biblical references built into the show. So yeah, there is this, rich sort of mythology of it, which I think a lot of people identify with. So I can see why this has become so popular, or its popularity has endured.
And it doesn't disappear into pretentiousness like some people feel Battlestar Galactica did.
Yeah, well, it does go to some, there's some very abstract bits, which is kind of strange. There's a lot of tonal shifts involved, occasionally quite violent fights, between the Avas, the giant robots, and the angels. And also there is some quite silly comedy bits thrown in, like the main characters live with a penguin as one of their roommates, and that's never really explained. But also then it will shift into some very abstract or psychological sections. There's one battle sequence that takes place entirely just the only sound is this like soft piano score and things like that, and they kind of ramp up and build up the layers of this sort of surrealness as it goes across. The ending is famously a disappointment, and it is a bit of an odd ending. I can see why people weren't happy with it, which is why there are a confusing number of film remakes of the show in lots of different continuums and timelines. I think I've finally managed to get straight in my head all the different Evangelion films. It's a bit confusing. I think in the desperate desire to remake the show to give it a better ending. So I guess so similar to Battlestar Galactica in that sense. It starts with the action, throws in this extra layer of kind of mythology. Possibly at the end, the mythology took over a bit too much, and then now they've attempted to claw it back with remakes.
So have you watched any of these remakes, or have you just watched the original show?
Now, I've just finished the original run of 26 animes. That's all on Netflix. 2 of the film remakes are on Netflix as well. They form one alternative chronology, and then there's also a different film chronology that you can watch on Amazon Prime. So I'm going to start diving into the films. I'm definitely going to watch the 2 that are on Netflix. Maybe give Evangelion a break before I watch the third alternative chronology on Amazon. Strangely, whilst we record, possibly a little bit too late by the time you listen to this, Prince Charles Cinema is spending a whole week screening End of Evangelion, which is the film that is the end of the chronology. That's the Netflix films. So you can go see that in the cinema. If I watch the others, I might see if I can grab that in the cinema before the week's out, time depending. But the original show is, that's on Netflix is really worth watching. There's some absolutely beautiful episodes. The way it kind of dives into the mental states of the character, uses really interesting visual language and some, very surreal scenes to really get to grips with what the characters are thinking and what they're going through, which is, it's a lot when the fate of the world rests on you and you're just a kid.
Yeah. I knew a lot of people who were quite into this at school. I never watched it or read it. I think it's a manga as well. I'm not quite sure whether it was anime then manga or manga then anime.
I think the anime came first, but there is manga versions and there's lots of different other versions,
Yeah, but I knew a few people who were into it. I should probably one day catch up. At some point in my late 40s, early 50s, maybe I'll finally have watched all the things I feel like I should have probably watched in my 20s.
This has an enduring popularity. I guess the fact that since the show has been made, they've been making these films, which I suppose has kept it, the forefront of people's minds. There's a reason why the popularity of this show has endured and why it's one that people, certainly outside Japan, one that people watch and really like. And I think it is because there are these characters that people can really connect with, and it does get into their psychology. Like almost all the characters are experiencing some kind of trauma, some kind of family related trauma. Usually their connections to their parents and parents who have died. The main character, Shinji, felt abandonment from his father, who's in charge of the EVA program and is, sort of his commanding officer, and is always trying to impress him. So, and there's lots of episodes that kind of explore the backstories of individual characters. Some of them are really dark, considering I assume this is normally aimed at children, but they do explore a lot of issues, including like suicide, depression, neglect, emotional abuse. So I think that's why, this kind of rich layer, obviously the EVA fights are cool. They're great to watch and there's lots of good visuals, but I think it's this deep exploration of these characters that are very relatable because of the pain they've gone through that has kept this popular. And it's one of the reasons why it's one that people keep coming back to, keep rewatching, which is why I decided to watch it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I think, entered the enduring classics list at this point, which is why it's possibly floating on the list of things I would like to watch, especially because I have watched slightly more like animation in the last few years than I had before that.
Yeah, and each episode is only about 23 minutes.
You know how to sell it to me.
Yeah, they go down quite easily. They're quite easy to fit into your schedule. And it's just a one season run, 26 episodes. It has a theme that I know a lot of people really like. I think the theme does not match the tone of the show. It's kind of the theme from a 90s quiz show.
Cool.
With the song, which, I don't know. It's not quite Kingdom level of bizarre opening credits, but it's up there.
I mean, I love the Kingdom opening credits, so if that's a comparison, then you've sold me.
The Kingdom opening credits are a thing of beauty.
Thank you.
Possibly the greatest opening credits of all time. But the Evangelion opening credits, in terms of pure weirdness, do give them a run for their money. But I can recommend this. I'm always interested in Japanese culture, especially, in terms of live action cinema. Recently I've watched Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy and Drive My Car. And, we've talked on the podcast about Alice in Borderland and things like that. So I've seen some anime over the years. I'm trying to fill in the gaps. So I've still got to watch like Full Metal Alchemist, Cowboy Bebop. A lot of this stuff is on Netflix. But this is a piece of my cinematic education to fill in, and it was definitely worth filling in. So if you're like me thinking, what is the hype around this Evangelion? I'm not sure about it. Dive in, and certainly after a few episodes you'll get into it.
Okay, and our first main feature this episode is Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. And this is, of course, a new comedy action fantasy movie starring Chris Pine as the leader of a gang of scoundrels and ruffians who do, perhaps inevitably, turn out to have a heart of gold, undertaking a quest to try and help him recover his daughter from Hugh Grant, an evil conman who has betrayed them. And of course, there's more to it than that. Their quest turns out to be longer and more epic than they could imagine. Its ending turns out to be about a bit more than just saving Chris Pine's daughter. But yes, this is an epic fantasy adventure movie based on the classic role-playing game. We have seen it. Alistair, what did you think?
Yeah, so this is certainly an entertaining night in the cinema. You know, it's funny, it's got great action scenes. I feel like I've done that as an intro to quite a few films over the last few years, but it's certainly worth seeing on pure entertainment value. What I found quite interesting is the humour in this is very silly, which I quite like. It's quite off the wall in that sense. It's got none of the sort of knowing irony or sarcasm of, I guess, all the kind of various Joss Whedon inspired films that combine action and comedy in the way that, I guess Joss Whedon pioneered in Buffy and then into, like, the Avenger movies that he directed. Yeah, there's not really any kind of subversion of the genre, jokes about like the wizards are dressed in a silly way or anything like that. They're selling this as a believable fantasy world which you just go into, but with lots of silliness and lots of jokes. And yeah, it's maybe a tad too long, but other than that, it is just a sort of funny romp with some good action scenes in it and some good cast. But yeah, overall it gets the thumbs up.
Yeah. Well, I think this kind of sort of 12A action fantasy movie, fantasy covering a wide range of forms of zappy action here, has been the dominant genre in cinema for a while, and this might actually be the best one I've seen for a while, including, yes, a number of Marvel movies. It's a fun, rollicking adventure. It has clear characters and decent jokes. It tugs the emotions just a little bit. Just to be clear, not in a massive sobbing way. This isn't, make me cry, get a good review in this case. It's not that bad. But also, failed tear-jerking is just as bad as failed comedy. I'd rather they just sort of push gently at the emotions and focus on including successful comedy, which they have done. So yeah, no, I enjoyed this. I think Chris Pine especially has deserved a decent vehicle in one of these for a while. He did have a decent enough time as Kirk in those Star Trek films, but that series seemed to get a bit bogged down in, I don't really know why they seem to struggle to make any more of those. But yeah, this feels a lot more fun and lightweight and basic fun. And I think Chris Pine deserves some basic fun after all he's been through.
Yeah, he's a good leading man. He's kind of got all the things you need from a modern franchise lead. He's handsome, he's charismatic, he looks good with a beard. He, he can emote in the right place. I mean, they've gone for the very straight up emotional plot to this, which is that, he gets put in prison for a bit for 2 years, gets out, tries to get his daughter back, realize that his friend who was a con man has convinced the daughter that he's a bad guy, and now he's trying to complete magical quests, defeat some villains, and win, the love of his daughter back. You can kind of summarize it on a playing card, the kind of emotional beats, but it kind of does them all well. Putting the comedy front and center, I think, is good, meaning that they're very aware that, keep the jokes coming. That's what is going to make this entertaining.
I think Dungeons & Dragons, as a franchise, there seems to be an awareness here that people aren't coming for the lore. Like half the appeal of the game, I say this as someone who has never played the game, by the way, so forgive my butchering of the whole appeal, is that the lore doesn't necessarily get in the way of the fun, There's no lengthy exposition, it's mostly just rollicking action sequences and banter. The characters are just sort of clearly defined and then left to interact, and I think that makes it feel like, it's not a game, but I think there's something of the appeal of the game in there.
Yes, I've seen a lot of people on Twitter, for example, saying that they've captured the kind of anarchic fun of playing D&D in that it's basically an excuse just to sit around with your friends and kind of banter and make jokes, whilst with a sort of vague fantasy plot unfolds to give it some kind of structure, and that's pretty much what this film is.
Yeah, they could have come up with some potentially clever meta way of bringing in an actual game of D&D, pull back to the players or some shit, and I was sort of expecting that to happen at the end. But the fact that they don't do that very obvious meta thing and instead do this tone that does kind of capture the feel of it is, I think, ultimately, the fact that they pulled it off is good and possibly even arguably better and more successful.
Yeah, they're not trying to do a Lego movie type thing, where I pull back and reveal, as you say.
I mean, nice work if you could get it. The Lego movie was really good, but, if they just done a sort of cheap knockoff of that, then I would be here snarking about it being a cheap knockoff of the Lego movie.
Yeah, exactly. I feel that, like, the kind of overall tone, plot, and construct they're aiming at is sort of aimed at people in the lower part of the teens. It's a 12A, so like around 12 to sort of 15. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm much closer to 40 than I am to 12, and I enjoyed this.
Really?
And thought, believe it. Yeah, I know it's hard to believe. And I did really enjoy this, but I think the fact that, for example, the humor is very straight up silly. There's, like I say, no attempt to do anything in terms of like genre subversion, knowing irony, sarcasm, basically stuff that just would completely fly over the head of probably most like early teens. There's no kind of even like Terry Pratchett style satirizing of fantasy tropes. It's very much doing fantasy tropes. There's wizards, there's thieves, there's dragons, there's trolls.
Well, yeah, I mean, even that, again, I haven't played much Dungeons and Dragons, but I have to get the feeling that if you're sitting down to play a lengthy campaign of Dungeons and Dragons, if someone is determined to make, endless jokes about how, this wizard stuff is a bit silly, isn't it? He's just wearing a frock, that person will probably start annoying the rest of the adventuring party pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, yeah.
There's some sense that including that in this film isn't the right tone. Making this a fairly affectionate, fun fantasy film is, I think, very much part of the point.
Exactly, yeah. And like I say, the fact that they've gone for this sort of sillier humour, rather than knowing irony, works totally in the world. It all connects up quite nicely, creates a good tone. And as you say, you don't need to be aware of the wider lore of D&D or really like this world to kind of get into the story. It was quite nice. There was references to Baldur's Gate at various points, which is a video game I enjoyed a lot.
Yeah, there's references to Waterdeep, which is in the title of a game called Lords of Waterdeep, which I've played on Steam a few times online.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm cool. I have technically played a form of D&D. I take that statement back. Just not the one everyone actually knows as D&D.
Yeah, well, it's all kind of descended from the original game. And also, I did like that in the terms of little nods. There's one bit when they encounter another adventuring party who are dressed exactly like the characters from that 90s Saturday morning cartoon D&D. That's just a very small thing in the background, but it was there.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can get your affectionate nods in, and again, credit to them that this does not become intrusive to the film. I didn't really get the feeling that I was watching something that was flailing desperately to be a franchise. There wasn't any obvious throwing things out for spin-offs. The ending doesn't. You could call this a spoiler, I guess, but the ending does not reach out to a future sequel. It ties itself off fairly neatly in a way that could one day have another story, but doesn't have to.
Yeah, you're right. And the only post-credit scene they have is just a callback to a previous joke, which is funny, but yeah, it's not another villain putting on a suit of armor saying, like, I'm coming for you, or something like that.
But yeah, I mean, they could make another one with these characters. They could never make another one, or they could make another one with mostly different characters, and it would still work. That would arguably be more interesting, but the Hollywood machine is famously conservative.
Obviously, it's called D&D Honor Amongst Thieves, setting up the name of the franchise. This is the 21st century Hollywood. IP is everything. I'm sure they'll want to spin this off into, well, whatever they can in order to make money. But you are right. One of the things also, where lots of franchises have fallen down, it's not overburdened by the need to establish these group of characters that can be spun off here and this character that can be spun off there. It is focused on telling the story of these characters. I'm sure everyone involved would love if they made more sequels and everyone get to make more money out of this. But, that desperate need to be a franchise is not obscuring just the fun of this entertaining movie.
And as you say, the characters are there. I mean, it's not, a heartbreaking journey with a series of staggering revelations, but the characters are strong enough to carry the story and they all have a distinct role which they fill. With the slight exception, and the two criticisms I would do of this film is the one you've already done, which is it's probably a bit too long. And the other one is that the fourth member of the party, the tiefling shapeshifter, doesn't have much to her beyond the cool power and the sort of half-baked romance subplot.
Yeah, the sort of cynical dislike of humans, yeah.
Even that she barely mentions.
Yeah,
I mean, in a film which is slightly too long, you'd think they could have found room to give her a shred of motivation and backstory like they do for everybody else.
Yeah, that didn't work.
It didn't infuriate me or anything. I just came away thinking, wow, that fourth character was paper thin.
Yeah. And considering they also had Sophia Lillis, who, was good in that It film recently that we saw, she's been good in other things. So, the whole thing's well cast. It's just a shame that character wasn't particularly well written. Yeah, as you say, she has a bit half-baked romance plot. Although, again, slight spoiler, they don't even kiss. I mean, I know it's a film aimed at teens and stuff, but this is really quite modest even by modern blockbuster standards. There's definitely, a lot's been written about the declining quantity of sex in blockbusters from the 80s when it was, if anything, oversexed, to now when our blockbusters are very much undersexed.
Well, yeah, I know Marvel films are famously, people talk about Marvel films being sexless, but Marvel films look comparatively horny compared to this.
Yeah. There's a good essay actually on the website Blood Knife called something like "Everyone is Beautiful, No One is Fucking." Which is worth reading to explore this. But yeah, it is pretty chaste, but the cast are doing their best with what they've got. Yeah, we've mentioned Chris Pine. Michelle Rodriguez, again, is sort of the second most prominent character. She's a good action star, probably a bit more of a developed character here than her Fast and the Furious character. And also I thought Hugh Grant as the villain, actually, considering as someone in his 90s pretty boy, hapless fop romantic comedy period I found a little bit annoying. His late career renaissance playing British villains in action movies and the like is actually really good and entertaining. So yeah, good turn from Hugh Grant.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's been, slowly turning towards villains for a while, hasn't he? I mean, he was the villain in the Bridget Jones trilogy back in the day. So,
Yeah.
clearly he's worked that out as a trajectory.
Yeah, that was quite clever, sort of, a subversion of his persona he built up in the 90s, yeah. That he was basically playing the same character, but it turned out he was a dick rather than the lovable nice guy. I understand he's had some success on TV in some high-profile BBC dramas, which have been well received. He is a talented actor. They're the sort of people you want. Again, similar Chris Pine, Michelle Rodriguez. They're talented, but they're good at doing popcorn entertainment.
Yeah, and he's not actually in that many scenes, Hugh Grant, if you count them on your fingers. But yeah, he's charismatic enough to make an impression when he does appear.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But yeah, this is very much firing on all cylinders.
It looks good as well. Like, I'm not an effects expert. I'm not someone who can, watch a scene and tell you exactly how they did the effects or exactly what is or is not CGI. But after a few Marvel films which look far too much like people were just superimposed on a photograph, this actually looked pretty good. I get the feeling there may have been a few more practical effects in this than there were in the average Marvel film. I was very rarely taken out of it by thinking that's a CGI background. That's not real.
I get the feeling they did quite a lot of on-location photography for this. Or at least they did it for the backgrounds rather than building the backgrounds totally from scratch. I was a little bit distracted by the fact that every single medieval building in the UK cropped up at one point. As there's definitely some bits. I definitely recognised, I think it's Christchurch College at Oxford. I think Exeter Cathedral turned up at one point.
Nick compliments the film for not using CGI backgrounds. Alistair bitches because they used real castles.
There was a bit at one point when I was like, they used the same castle that they used for Hogwarts in Harry Potter. I recognised a bit of the doorway. Yeah, there's 3 real life locations that they did the photography for Hogwarts at. There's a castle in Scotland, there's Middle Temple, and I think it was Christchurch College, Oxford.
How could they? 2 out of 10.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's places that, there's a limited amount of medieval places that you can probably safely film in. I think Exeter Cathedral Cloister turned up at one point. It might have also been in the pub Oxford. And interesting, there's a scene in a large Colosseum with gladiatorial style games, which the exterior is just the Colosseum from Rome. They've just taken that and digitally plonked it into their world, just made it look bigger, and then filled out the interior so it doesn't look like a ruin. But I was a bit like, at one point there's a shot of the city and I was like, that's the Colosseum, like straight from our world into their world.
I take it back, you're right, this film sucks. From now on, every film gets 0 out of 10 unless it takes place entirely in the Metaverse.
No, I mean, I thought it was just nice to spot these things. And I think actually it's a good point, actually. The fact that they've done location photography and the fact that I don't think they flew everyone to Rome to film the Colosseum, but they clearly, I think, shot the exterior and used an actual footage and imported that rather than built an entire building from scratch digitally. And it does look more believable. It gives it a sense of weight rather than the complete weightlessness of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. I think, I'm kind of agreeing with your point that it does seem more like a substantial real world.
I'm glad I've successfully complained until you agree with me.
Yes.
The film did look good, yes. I agree. Them taking the time to film that list of buildings does seem to have paid off. I had a good time and spent very little of it noticing bits of CGI.
We've also had a comment in on Twitter from Stephen Cox, author of Our Child of the Stars and other books. And he said, 5-star popcorn movie, loved it. I mean, that kind of sums it up. It's definitely a spring blockbuster. I mean, it's been released just in time for the Easter holidays when kids are off school and everyone wants to go to the cinema. But I think, definitely 5-star popcorn blockbustering.
No, this is, as I said at the top, probably one of my favourites of the very popular 12A action fantasy genre I've seen in a while. Strong recommend. Okay, and last up today, it's Tetris. Sadly not a high-concept movie that attempts to give a plot to the falling blocks in the game, but rather a biographical film about the licensing of the rights for the original Tetris game, which may not sound thrilling. So, Alistair, was it?
Well, actually, it was. That's the review, right? Goodbye. When I sat down to watch this film, I was thinking, this is a film, as I understood it, and I like to go into films where possible, knowing as little as I can. I thought, if this is a film about the making of Tetris, we all know Tetris was a gargantuan success as a product. So where is the tension in this? I mean, see also this new movie called Air that's coming out about the making of Air Jordans, in which the plot is they came up with an idea for a shoe and it was a big success. So I was thinking, where is the drama in this? And it turns out there are 2 sources of the drama. One which is the wrangling over the license between the various companies that he gets passed between, which again could be mind-numbingly tedious, but by focusing on character relationships, they've found a lot of drama there. And then also the fact that the rights are ultimately owned by the Soviet Union. A significant amount of the movie takes place in the Soviet Union, them attempting to negotiate with an authoritarian state, which is really, really tense and has some quite dark and scary moments. So yeah, that was a good film.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed this. I wasn't sure what to expect from it either, but it turns out it's a sort of fun, slightly lightweight, but still, at times, quite tense, corporate espionage thriller movie. It's nothing revolutionary, but it's very breezy, it zips along. It's got some occasional fun, sort of 8-bit visuals and little touches and flares to bring in Tetris blocks or pixels. The game is, not the game, the film, sorry, is technically divided into levels. It's not, high-level metafiction or anything. They have not, in fact, attempted to dramatise the game of Tetris. But yeah, it's good. It's got as Alistair said, a good sort of twisty plot with some slightly tense historical drama elements, and Taron Egerton, who plays the lead, is incredibly good, actually. I think him and his sort of sympathetic, likeable energy as this sort of main businessman does do a lot to make this film work. He's on screen for, most of it, and he's really, really good. I'm not sure if you'll remember it for a huge amount of time after you see it, but it's a good, rollicking film while it's on, and I did feel the necessary emotions during the highs and lows of where the deal looks like it might fail, or where it looks like, as often happens in these movies, Taron Egerton might have accidentally torpedoed his family due to his obsession with Tetris, that sort of thing. Good film. I enjoyed it. 2 hours long, slightly shorter than Dungeons and Dragons, and yeah, I didn't really feel the 2 hours at all.
Yeah. You're right that Taron Egerton is the kind of the core of this movie. He's the likable heart that you relate to. I did like especially the kind of ongoing plot line with his friendship with Alexei Pratronov, the creator of Tetris. There was a nice bit of character drama there, played by Nikita Efremov. I think they've got a reasonable number of actual Russians in this film.
Yeah, no, a lot of the Russian characters are played by actual Russians rather than people doing accents. Fair enough.
It gives this layer of authenticity. It's got the appropriate amounts of character drama and relationship drama. There's his family, obviously. There's a sort of slightly hackneyed plot bit about him missing his daughter's assembly performance because he's so focused on getting the rights to Tetris, and there's some family falling apart drama. He's put up their house as collateral on getting this game released. It gets you emotionally invested, and also I guess provides the necessary motivation to why he's willing to go to Russia. And even when very scary security people take him aside and put a stern hand on his shoulder and say, you should leave. That's the point where most people are like, yep, I'm getting out. But obviously it provides the motivation, which I know he can only succeed because he'll lose everything. So, which provides the motivation, which leads to more tension, so it works.
Well, yeah, exactly. Those parts are the parts where, were a sneering, cynical reviewer to be watching this film. They might say, why are you still here? Obviously risking your safety and or your family's safety for a game about falling blocks. Go away, run home. Yeah, the big challenge for this film is for Taron Egerton to portray this sort of well-meaning obsession he has with bringing Tetris to the people, and obviously plus I guess motivated by the desire not to lose his house, so to just generally move it to this place where you understand why he keeps going and keeps pushing even when the Russian state are leaning on him increasingly hard to just drop it and go away,
which is I think genuinely tense. Those bits are. It ramps up quite well. It starts with Russia's a bit grim, isn't it? And then as I know, Russia is actually really scary, and certainly under the Soviet Union, when you're on the watch list of the security services, it does get very tense. There's a good scene when he visits Alexei's character's apartment, and you're forbidden to have foreigners in your apartment, in the Soviet Union, and tension ensues. So it does actually get to a pretty tense point by building up the layers of menace throughout.
Yeah, it does just happen to also fit the sort of Hollywood template of a plucky underdog who snatches the Tetris rights from under the noses of both a group of big bad corporations and the big bad Soviet Union. So that's nice for Hollywood, I guess.
Yeah, you're right. It fits a very conventional plot arc. But while I was in the film, I was sold on it.
Yeah, I haven't done intense research into the realism, although I did gather from a couple of remarks I saw online that the actual sequence of events, funnily enough, did not feature a brief car chase.
No, I did, even when I was watching that, I'm not sure if they actually had a car chase. But, I don't know, dramatic licensing.
And although I will say, while we're talking about the car chase, sort of contrasting to something I said about Dungeons & Dragons, there are a few bits set outdoors in the daytime in the Soviet Union in this film where it really does look like they're walking around in front of a photo. Yeah. There's some proper bad outdoor special effects for some of the outdoor Russia stuff.
I don't think they had an enormous budget for this, and most of it seemed to have been spent on the 8-bit retro title cards, I suppose.
Most of the bits where they're in rooms or sort of hiding in dark concrete structures at night are kind of fine. But yeah, the few bits where they're out and about in Russia during the day, I cannot tell you how certain I am that they did not go to Russia.
Yeah. Again, all the hallmarks are there. Crowd scenes are quite thin. There's not huge numbers of people around, so yeah, as well. And it's one of those things that it's a flaw, but I felt that at least it had had enough momentum to keep me entertained.
Oh yeah, it's only mostly for a few bits towards the end. Aside from that, they seem to have cleverly avoided much outdoor lusher shooting.
Yeah. And, I thought there really was an interesting political level to this, because obviously we mentioned the Soviet Union, but one of the other main plot threads is one of the other people involved in the chain of license owners for Tetris and sort of competing with the Taron Egerton character is Robert Maxwell and his company, and it's set around the time of the fall of Maxwell Empire when his stealing from the pension fund was revealed. And I think, it's quite interesting that what this film shows is the worst aspects of capitalism and socialism. You have Robert Maxwell, his greed, his nepotism that he's just put his son, who's a bit of an idiot, in charge of important stuff, his sort of unrestrained avarice. And obviously on one side you've got the authoritarian communism that uses violence and terror to control people. And they're kind of both brought down by just greed. There's greed for power, greed for money, which is kind of positioned opposite Taron Egerton's Hank Rogers character and the Alexei character, who at least superficially appear to be motivated by the love for what they're doing. They just want to get Tetris to people because it's just a really good game. I mean, certainly the Alexei character didn't create it to make money. He just created it because he loves the program. Obviously, the Taron Egerton character is trying to make money, but it's sort of positioned more that like he's more like believes in the art of Tetris, whereas everyone else is kind of greedy for the money of it. And it kind of creates this sort of dichotomy, which has, it's sort of an interesting political development to it.
Again, it makes it work as a sort of underdog doing it for the art story, as long as you don't think too much about the fact that he's then going to, sell it to Nintendo so they can make loads of money.
Yeah. Exactly. In the moment, you're kind of on the side of these people who believe in video games versus the people who are like just trying to either get money out of it through bribes or licensing, or people who are just thuggishly determined to suppress anything that, that could threaten them. There is a lot of knowing Soviet history. Mikhail Gorbachev, star of that Pizza Hut commercial, crops up at one point. There's a lot of knowing nods. At one point, someone says, if we let Tetris get out, then we'll just be selling all of Russia to the highest bidder, which obviously is exactly what happened the moment communism fell, that like vast oil and gas industries and kind of manufacturing things were just flogged off for nothing to people who are now incredibly wealthy. It's fairly on the nose, about communism's crumbling. People don't like it. Yep, there's a scene involving people queuing for a shop that doesn't have much goods. And then it's kind of positioned against, but if we just become hyper-capitalist, that's kind of rubbish as well. So there is an interesting political exploration here. It's pretty on the nose, but this isn't really a film about politics, but it does have that element to it.
Yeah, I mean, if you enjoy this sort of period 80s drama about video games with a hint of sort of the politics of the time and a hint of personal psychology, then I recommend watching Halt and Catch Fire, which is like this, only way, way better. Not that this is bad, but Halt and Catch Fire is way better.
We've discussed that on the podcast before, I think.
I believe I have recommended it before, but to be honest, one of the things this film did to me was make me want to rewatch Halt and Catch Fire, so here's a mention of it here. Also, a bit like Halt and Catch Fire, and unlike Cocaine Bear, which we mentioned a few weeks back, this period film is definitely not above leaning hard into its period setting and dropping in a few period-specific bangers.
Yep. I did like the soundtrack with everything from Europe, Final Countdown to Pet Shop Boys.
Oh yeah, no, I am fully in favour. Big Pet Shop Boys fan.
No, it was good. Yeah, just really liked how the score for the film was a kind of 80s synth score. I thought it was kind of really, really appropriate and stuff. Which also they managed to weave the Tetris theme into the score at various key moments, such as, I think, the car chase we mentioned before. They have the Tetris theme in the background, or at least a sort of a version of it that works with the overall theme of the music. So that was a nice little touch.
Well, they clearly decided to go big on the car chase. They had the cars sort of dissolving into pixels and blocks and stuff. That's the one big action scene. Let's try and get some crashing blocks into it.
Yeah, exactly.
Fair enough. If you're going to shove a car chase into the Tetris film, then why not?
Why not? Yeah. It just really sort of tied together a strong evocation of the period. I really liked how they kept the fact that absolutely everyone smokes all the time as well. Yeah, you do see these like sanitized historical films. Last night I watched Brooklyn for the first time, which is a very good film, and actually I did really like. But yeah, I think a lot more people in the 50s would have been smoking than in that film, although there are some people who smoke. But yeah, I like how almost everyone in this is kind of pretty much continuously smoking, partly I guess because they're stressed, but also it's not kind of, one of the things when they've got rid of the smoking from the past.
Yeah, no, I think there's one scene in this where I think the Taron Egerton character was on a plane and everyone was smoking, and I was sort of sitting there going, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, you used to be able to do that. Smoke on trains, you could smoke on the top desk of buses.
Wow, sounds great.
Yeah. The whole past smelled like fag ends.
Will I use that as the podcast episode title? It's hard to tell.
We'll see. And for any American listeners, yes, we call cigarettes fags in the UK, just for context.
Although for the record, I get the feeling that may have been phased out a bit as time goes by for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
I don't get the feeling that's as ubiquitous in British culture as it used to be.
No.
Alistair's just stuck in the past, much like this movie.
Much like this movie. It was a knowing 80s reference. Much like all the bit things in this movie, such as everything from Europe to the Game Boy. They've got those nostalgia moments.
I'm not going to pretend to have nostalgia for the 80s. They finished when I was 6.
Yeah. Although I did like how when they showed him the first ever Game Boy, everyone's mind's blown by the fact it's got 8 kilobytes of RAM. And it was like, wow, there's loads. That did make me laugh.
Well, yeah, that's a classic aspect of all these sort of period computer films, isn't it? I'm sure there was some of that in The Social Network as well.
Yeah.
This film's obvious predecessor.
I mean, it is the daddy of the how did this corporate behemoth come into being genre. You know, Social Network is a good film, and this is a good late addition to the canon.
Yeah, I mean, tonally, they're not that similar, but it is also a period film about how something computery was made, with a quite synthy soundtrack.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, another solid film. Good episode. 2 very solid films.
Yeah, these are both things I'd recommend. They're also both things that I felt a little bit cynical when I first saw them. Was like, is there going to be drama in this? Is this just going to be another, that thing you like, especially aimed at middle-aged people? Remember your youthful years, D&D and Tetris and the Game Boy? Wasn't life better then when we didn't have cost of living crisis?
Oh, come on. In fairness, D&D is a bigger deal now than it was when in our
That's
youth.
a very good point, I suppose.
Especially in the 90s when we were actually, properly coming of age young. D&D was, I think, in a bit of a slump.
Yeah, it was probably more of a minority pursuit. I mean, I was pretty nerdy in the 90s, but I didn't play D&D. I did play the video games, though, like Baldur's Gate, I suppose. But yeah, these were two things I thought on the surface. Is this going to be fun? Is this actually good, or is it just, I don't know, cynical cash-ins? And actually both of them are like, yeah, no, go in, watch it. You get 2 hours of entertainment. It's been a pretty good week sitting down watching stuff, to be honest.
Mission accomplished.
That's all we have time for today. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please leave us a review in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you'll find other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio content, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you want to get still more from us, you can follow us on social media, where we are at MFV Podcast on Twitter or Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook. And if you want to follow me specifically on the socials, you can go to nickmb on Twitter, nickbryan.com on Instagram, or indeed nickbryan.com on the internet, where there will, I think, be news of my new crowdfunded comic, Stone Cop. He is a cop made of stone, coming soon.
And if you want more from me, you can follow me on Twitter, where I'm at AlistairJRBall, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. You can also join us on the next issue of Moderate Fantasy Violence, where we will be revisiting our home world in The Mandalorian. Join us in 2 weeks for that. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.
That's the Tetris theme, isn't it?